My name is Ava Wilson. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how I built something incredible from nothing, only to have the people I loved most try to take it away from me. Picture this. You work day and night for 5 years, pouring your heart, soul, and every penny you have into building your dream. You sacrifice weekends, holidays, and even relationships to make it happen. Then, just when you finally succeed, the very people who doubted you from the beginning come knocking at your door. But this time, they don't want to congratulate you. They want a piece of what you built. If you've ever felt like your own family didn't believe in your dreams, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, because I know exactly how that feels, and you're going to want to hear how this story ends. Have you ever been in a situation where the people closest to you became the biggest obstacle to your success? Let me know in the comments, because trust me, you're not alone in this struggle. I'm sharing this story because I know there are others out there who need to hear that it's possible to overcome family pressure and build something amazing. And if you're dealing with something similar right now, I want you to know that your dreams are valid, no matter what anyone else says. You see, when I first told my parents about my plan to open my own clinic, their reaction wasn't what I expected from the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally. My dad, David, looked at me like I had just announced I was joining the circus, while my mom, Margaret, immediately started listing all the reasons why it would never work. They had spent years building their own traditional careers, dad as an accountant, mom as a school teacher, and they couldn't understand why I wanted to take such a risky path. The disappointment in their eyes was something I'll never forget, and it planted a seed of doubt that would follow me for years. But here's the thing about family dynamics that nobody talks about. Sometimes the people who love you the most become the biggest barriers to your growth, not because they want to hurt you, but because they're afraid of losing you to failure. My parents had watched me struggle through college, seen me work multiple jobs just to pay my bills, and they genuinely believed they were protecting me from heartbreak. However, what they didn't realize is that their lack of faith became the very thing that made me more determined to prove them wrong. Every time they said, "Be realistic, Ava," I heard, "Prove us wrong," and that became my driving force. The irony is that their doubt became my fuel, but it also created a distance between us that I never expected. As the months went by and I started taking concrete steps toward opening my clinic, family dinners became uncomfortable battlegrounds where every conversation somehow circled back to my impractical dreams. My younger brother, James, would just sit there awkwardly while our parents tried to convince me to get a stable job at an established clinic instead. But I knew deep down that working for someone else would never give me the fulfillment I was seeking, and that's when I realized I had to choose between their approval and my dreams. Now, let me tell you something about success that nobody prepares you for. It's heavier than failure in ways you never expect. When you're struggling, when you're grinding day after day without seeing results, at least you have the comfort of knowing that most people understand your situation. But when you finally make it, when your bank account starts growing, and your business starts thriving, suddenly you become a different person in everyone's eyes. People look at you differently, they talk to you differently, and worst of all, they start expecting things from you that they never expected before. If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt the weight of other people's expectations after achieving something, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me reach more people who need to hear these stories. I want to know, has success ever felt like a burden to you? Have people in your life changed the way they treat you once you started doing well? Drop a comment below because I read every single one, and your experiences help other viewers realize they're not going through this alone. Sometimes sharing our struggles is the first step to overcoming them. I remember the exact moment I realized success had changed everything. It was about 6 months after my clinic had become profitable, and I was finally able to pay myself a decent salary. I was at my cousin Rachel's wedding, feeling proud and confident for the first time in years, when my Aunt Susan made a comment that stopped me cold. "Ava's doing so well now," she said to my mom. "Maybe she can help pay for Kevin's college tuition." Kevin is my cousin, and while I love him dearly, the assumption that my success automatically made me responsible for other people's expenses was something I hadn't anticipated. That night, I drove home feeling confused and overwhelmed by emotions I couldn't quite name. On one hand, I was grateful to be in a position where I could potentially help my family, but on the other hand, I felt like my hard work was being reduced to a resource for everyone else to tap into. The girl who had been told to be realistic and get a safe job, was now expected to be the family's financial safety net. It was like I had gone from being the dreamer who nobody believed in to being the golden goose that everyone wanted to benefit from, without any acknowledgement of the journey it took to get there. But here's what really bothered me about that moment. Not once did anyone ask me how I felt about carrying that responsibility. No one asked if I was happy, if I was stressed, or if I needed support in any way. The conversation immediately shifted to what I could do for others, as if my success was somehow a shared achievement, rather than the result of years of personal sacrifice and determination. And that's when I started to understand that success doesn't just change your life, it changes how everyone around you sees your life, and sometimes that can feel more isolating than being broke ever did. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of what my family would expect from me. You know, there's something magical about having a vision that's completely yours, something that nobody else can see or understand, but burns so bright inside you that it keeps you awake at night. For me, that vision was my own clinic, a place where I could practice medicine the way I believed it should be practiced, without corporate policies dictating how much time I could spend with each patient. I used to lie in bed visualizing every detail, the warm lighting in the waiting room, the comfortable chairs, the way I'd greet each person who walked through my door. It wasn't just about making money or proving a point. It was about creating something that would make a real difference in people's lives. I know some of you watching this have that same burning vision inside you, that dream that others might not understand but feels so real to you. If that's you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because I want to share more stories about turning those impossible dreams into reality. What's that one dream you have that others think is crazy, but you know in your heart is meant to be? Tell me in the comments, because I believe every dream deserves to be heard and supported. Sometimes all we need is one person who believes in us to keep going, and I want to be that person for you today. The idea for my clinic didn't come from a business plan or market research. It came from frustration with how disconnected modern healthcare had become. I was working at St. Mary's Hospital at the time, and I watched brilliant doctors burn out because they were forced to see 30 patients a day instead of actually caring for people. My supervisor, Dr. Thompson, was a good man, but even he admitted that the system was broken. "Ava," he told me one day, "we're treating symptoms, not people, and there's nothing we can do about it from the inside." That conversation planted the first seed of my clinic dream. But dreaming and planning are two completely different things, and I quickly learned that having a vision doesn't automatically give you the roadmap to achieve it. I spent months researching everything from business licenses to insurance requirements, and every new piece of information made the mountain seem higher. There were nights when I'd sit at my kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, feeling overwhelmed by all the legal and financial obstacles ahead. My friend Lisa would call and find me crying over permit applications, wondering if I was completely out of my mind for thinking I could pull this off. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the planning. It was holding on to that vision when everyone around me treated it like a cute hobby rather than a serious business venture. When I'd talk about my clinic at work, my colleague Dr. Martinez would pat my shoulder and say, "That's nice, Ava, but you know how hard it is to make it on your own, right?" Even well-meaning friends would suggest I start small or maybe consider it in a few years. But I realized that if I waited for the perfect time or for everyone to believe in my dream, I'd be waiting forever. Sometimes you have to be the first person to take your own dreams seriously, even when nobody else does. Let me be brutally honest with you about what nobody tells you about chasing your dreams. The loneliness is suffocating, and it comes from places you never expect. It's not just the loneliness of working late nights and missing social events, though that's part of it. It's the deeper loneliness of having a purpose that nobody around you understands or supports. I remember sitting in my empty future clinic space for the first time, looking at bare walls and broken fixtures, and feeling like I was completely insane for thinking this could work. The silence was deafening, and for a moment, I wondered if everyone who doubted me was right. If you're feeling that kind of loneliness right now, if you're pursuing something that makes others question your sanity, I need you to subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up, because you need to hear the rest of the story. Are you walking a path that feels impossibly lonely right now? Are you working towards something that nobody else seems to understand or believe in? Let me know in the comments, because I want you to know that every successful person has felt exactly what you're feeling right now. That loneliness isn't a sign that you're on the wrong path. It's often a sign that you're on the right one. The first 3 months were the hardest test of mental strength I'd ever experienced, And I'm not exaggerating when I say I question my decision every single day. My savings were disappearing faster than I'd calculated. Permits were taking longer than expected, and contractors kept finding new problems that needed fixing. My friend Emma would call me every week asking when I was going to come to my senses and go back to my hospital job. And honestly, there were days when that sounded like the most reasonable thing in the world, but something inside me refused to give up, even when logic suggested I should. What made it even harder was watching my peers at the hospital move forward with their traditional careers, while I felt like I was moving backwards. Dr. Sarah Kim got promoted to department head. My former roommate Jennifer bought a house, and here I was, eating ramen noodles and stressing about plumbing issues. At medical conferences, when people asked what I was doing, I'd have to explain my little clinic project, while they nodded politely and changed the subject. The isolation was real, and there were nights when I wondered if I was sacrificing my present for a future that might never come. But here's what I learned during those dark months that changed everything for me. The loneliness of pursuing your dreams is temporary, but the regret of not pursuing them is permanent. Every time I wanted to quit, I'd think about being 65 years old and wondering what if. I'd picture myself still working in someone else's system, still frustrated with the limitations, still dreaming about what could have been, and that fear of regret became stronger than my fear of failure. Some paths are meant to be walked alone, not because you're meant to stay alone, but because you need to prove to yourself that you can do it before anyone else will believe you can. The moment I needed my family's support the most was exactly when it disappeared completely, and that timing felt like a cruel joke from the universe. I'll never forget the day I finally worked up the courage to show my parents my business plan. 30 pages of research, financial projections, and dreams laid out in black and white. I had spent weeks perfecting it, imagining their faces lighting up when they realized how serious and prepared I was. Instead, my dad David barely glanced at the first page before sliding it back across the kitchen table, and my mom Margaret just shook her head with that disappointed look I knew too well. "Ava, honey," she said, "this is a nice fantasy, but you need to think about your future realistically. I know there are people watching this who have experienced that crushing moment when the people you love most become your biggest critics. And if that's you, please hit subscribe and like this video, because you need to hear how this story unfolds." Have you ever poured your heart into something only to have your own family dismiss it, without even trying to understand? Share your experience in the comments, because I want other viewers to know they're not alone in feeling that pain. Sometimes the people who are supposed to lift us up are the ones who accidentally tear us down, and that's exactly what happened to me that day. What hurt the most wasn't just their rejection, it was the way they dismissed 5 years of planning and preparation as if it were a child's drawing on the refrigerator. My brother James tried to soften the blow by saying, "Maybe you could start smaller, like working part-time at someone else's practice first." But even his attempt at support felt like another vote of no confidence. They kept using words like realistic and practical, but what I heard was impossible and foolish. That night, I locked myself in my childhood bedroom and cried harder than I had since college, feeling like the little girl who was always told her dreams were too big for her own good. The worst part was that their doubt started to become my doubt, creeping into my mind during the quietest moments when I was most vulnerable. I'd catch myself thinking, maybe they're right, maybe I am being naive, and those thoughts terrified me more than any financial risk or business challenge ever could. My friend Marcus noticed the change in me immediately when we met for coffee the next week. "You look defeated," he said. "What happened to that fire you had about your clinic?" And that's when I realized that I had let other people's fears become my own, even when those people had never taken a risk like this in their entire lives. But something shifted in me during that conversation with Marcus that would change everything moving forward. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Ava, your parents are good people, but they've never built anything from scratch. Their opinion about your business is like asking someone who's never driven a car to teach you how to race." That perspective hit me like lightning, because I realized I had been seeking approval from people who had no experience in what I was trying to do. And that's when I made the decision that would define the next 5 years of my life. I was going to stop asking for permission and start asking for forgiveness. But first, I had to deal with the war that was brewing inside my own head. The battle between your dreams and your family's expectations doesn't just happen around the dinner table. It happens inside your mind every single day, and it's the most exhausting fight you'll ever experience. I started having conversations with myself that sounded like courtroom arguments, with one side presenting all the reasons why my family was right, and I should give up, and the other side fighting desperately to hold on to my vision. Some mornings I'd wake up energized and ready to conquer the world, and by noon I'd be paralyzed by doubt, wondering if I was destroying my relationship with the people I loved most, just to chase an impossible dream. The internal conflict was so intense that I actually considered seeing a therapist, but I was afraid they'd side with my parents too. If you've ever felt torn between following your heart and keeping peace with your family, I need you to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because this internal struggle is something most people never talk about, but almost everyone experiences. Are you dealing with that voice in your head right now that sounds suspiciously like your parents telling you to be realistic? Have you ever felt guilty for wanting something different than what your family wants for you? Let me know in the comments, because these feelings are more common than you think, and sometimes just knowing others have been there can help you push through. The guilt was the worst part of the whole experience, and it caught me completely off guard, because nobody warns you about the guilt that comes with disappointing the people who raised you. My parents had sacrificed so much to put me through medical school, and here I was rejecting the traditional path they had worked so hard to make possible for me. Every time my mom would mention Dr. Johnson's daughter, who just got a great position at Mass General, I could hear the unspoken question, "Why can't you be more like her?" And honestly, there were days when I asked myself the same thing, wondering if I was being selfish or ungrateful for wanting something different. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that living someone else's version of success would be the ultimate betrayal, not of them, but of myself. My parents had raised me to be strong, independent, and hardworking. So why were they surprised when I wanted to use those qualities to build something of my own? The irony was that by pursuing my clinic, I was actually embodying every value they had taught me, just in a way they hadn't expected. Dr. Patricia Chen, my mentor from residency, helped me see this when she said, "Ava, the best way to honor your parents' sacrifices is to become the person they raised you to be, not the person they want you to be." That conversation with Dr. Chen was the turning point where I stopped seeing my dream as rebellion and started seeing it as evolution. I wasn't rejecting my family's values. I was applying them in a new context, taking the work ethic they had instilled in me and channeling it towards something that felt authentic to who I was becoming. The conflict didn't disappear overnight, but I finally understood that disappointing my parents temporarily was better than disappointing myself permanently. And once I made peace with that truth, everything changed. But I had no idea that the real test was still coming, and it would challenge everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. The moment everything changed for me wasn't some dramatic movie scene or inspiring speech. It happened on a Tuesday night at 2 a.m. when I was sitting on my bathroom floor, crying over a rejection letter from yet another bank that wouldn't give me a business loan. I had been rejected 17 times, and each letter felt like another person telling me my dream wasn't worth investing in. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked back at me like a stranger, exhausted, defeated, and questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. But somewhere between the tears and the frustration, something clicked in my brain that I can only describe as pure determination taking over from fear. If you're in that dark moment right now where everything feels impossible, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because what I'm about to share could change your perspective forever. Have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between your fear of failure and your fear of regret? Have you reached that point where giving up feels easier than continuing, but something inside you just won't let you quit? Tell me about it in the comments, because these moments of truth are what separate dreamers from achievers, and I want to celebrate your courage to keep going, even when everything seems to be working against you. That night on the bathroom floor, I made a decision that scared me more than any business risk ever could. I decided to stop seeking approval from other people and start trusting my own judgment completely. I realized that I had been giving everyone else the power to determine whether my dream was valid, from my parents to bank managers to random people at cocktail parties who would scrunch their faces when I mentioned opening my own clinic. But nobody else was going to live my life, work in my clinic, or deal with the consequences of my choices. So why was I letting them make decisions for me? The fear of disappointing others had become bigger than my fear of disappointing myself, and that was completely backwards. I called in sick to work the next day, something I had never done unless I was actually dying, and spent the entire day researching alternative funding options that I had been too scared to consider before. Private investors, medical equipment leasing, even crowdfunding platforms that I had dismissed as not professional enough. My friend Tyler had been telling me about angel investors for months, but I had been too proud to consider it, thinking that needing outside help somehow made me weak. but sitting there with my laptop, reaching out to investors and writing grant applications, I felt more powerful than I had in months because I was finally taking control of my own story. The loneliness didn't disappear overnight, but it transformed from something that paralyzed me into something that motivated me. Instead of feeling isolated because nobody understood my vision, I started feeling special because I had clarity about something that others couldn't see yet. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, who had successfully opened her own practice 3 years earlier, became my unofficial mentor and told me something I'll never forget. Ava, the loneliness you're feeling isn't punishment for chasing your dreams. It's preparation for the leadership role you're about to step into. Leaders always walk alone at first, but that doesn't mean they end up alone. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, even if nobody else could see it yet. Building something from nothing is like trying to solve a 1,000-piece puzzle where half the pieces are missing, and the picture on the box keeps changing. It's messy, frustrating, and absolutely nothing goes according to plan. My first major reality check came when the contractor, Bill Henderson, walked through my space and told me that my budget was optimistically unrealistic by about $40,000. The plumbing needed to be completely redone. The electrical system was from the 1970s, and don't even get me started on the HVAC requirements for a medical facility. I remember standing in that empty room, calculator in hand, wondering if I was about to become the world's most educated bankruptcy case. Those early construction months taught me more about myself than 4 years of medical school ever did, and every mistake became a lesson that I couldn't have learned any other way. When the first set of medical cabinets arrived damaged, and the company refused to replace them without charging me again, I spent an entire weekend learning how to repair them myself from YouTube videos. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, would see me carrying supplies back and forth and shake her head, probably wondering why a doctor was acting like a construction worker. But there was something deeply satisfying about fixing problems with my own hands instead of just writing prescriptions for other people's problems. The failures came fast and hard, but each one made me more resourceful and determined than before. My first attempt at designing the waiting room looked like a dentist's office from 1985, complete with uncomfortable chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. I had to scrap the entire design and start over, which set me back 2 months and several $1,000s I didn't have. But that failure taught me the importance of creating a healing environment, not just a functional space. And the second design became something I was genuinely proud of. Warm lighting, comfortable seating, and plants that made the whole place feel alive. The permit process alone nearly broke my spirit, involving more paperwork than my medical degree, and dealing with city officials who seemed determined to find problems with every aspect of my plan. I spent countless hours in government offices, learning regulations I never knew existed, and resubmitting applications with minor corrections that somehow required starting the entire process over again. My friend Jessica would find me at coffee shops surrounded by legal documents, looking like I was cramming for the world's most boring final exam. But navigating that bureaucratic maze taught me patience and attention to detail that would serve me well when dealing with insurance companies and medical boards later. By month 8 of construction, I had become a completely different person than the one who had first walked into that empty space. I could negotiate with contractors, troubleshoot electrical problems, and read building codes like they were medical journals. My hands were rough from manual labor, my back ached from lifting equipment, and I had paint under my fingernails more often than not. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who could handle anything, someone who had stopped waiting for permission and started making things happen. And that transformation was worth more than all the money and time I had invested, because I finally understood that I wasn't just building a clinic, I was building myself into the person capable of running it. The person I became during those construction months was someone I didn't even know existed inside me, and discovering that hidden strength was both terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I had always been the good girl, who followed rules, asked for permission, and stayed safely within the boundaries that others had set for me. But running my own project forced me to become comfortable with uncertainty, to make decisions without consensus, and to trust my instincts even when I had no precedent to follow. The day I fired my first contractor, Robert Chen, for consistently showing up late and doing shoddy work, I felt like I had crossed some invisible line from follower to leader, and there was no going back. One of the biggest personal barriers I had to overcome was my need to be liked by everyone, which had been sabotaging my decision-making since childhood. I would rather accept subpar work than hurt someone's feelings by pointing out their mistakes. And that people-pleasing tendency was costing me money and delaying my timeline. My business mentor, Sarah Martinez, called me out on this during one of our monthly meetings when she noticed I was complaining about the same contractor for the third time. "Ava," she said, "you're not running a friendship club, you're running a business. And if you can't make tough decisions now, how are you going to handle difficult patients or staff issues later?" That conversation was a wake-up call that changed how I approached every relationship moving forward. Learning to trust my own judgment was perhaps the hardest lesson of all, especially after years of seeking approval from professors, supervisors, and family members before making any significant decision. There were moments when I'd stand in my half-finished clinic at the end of a long day, looking at all the choices I had made without asking anyone's opinion, and feel genuinely proud of my independence. The paint colors, the equipment placement, the staff hiring decisions, every detail reflected my vision and my values, not some committee consensus or family expectation. It was the first time in my adult life that I was surrounded by the results of my own choices, and that feeling was addictive. But the growth wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal in ways I hadn't anticipated when I started this journey. I discovered that I was braver than I thought, more resilient than I believed, and capable of handling stress and uncertainty that would have sent the old version of me running back to the safety of employment. When the medical equipment financing fell through at the last minute, instead of panicking or calling my parents for help, I immediately started researching lease options and alternative suppliers. The woman who used to cry over difficult decisions was now solving complex problems before breakfast and feeling energized by the challenge. The most surprising change was in my relationship with failure, which transformed from something I desperately avoided to something I actually welcomed as a learning opportunity. When my first marketing campaign flopped spectacularly, generating exactly 0 new patients and costing me $2,000, I didn't see it as proof that I wasn't cut out for business ownership. Instead, I analyzed what went wrong, researched better strategies, and launched a second campaign that brought in 15 new patients in its first month. Each failure became data rather than defeat, and that mindset shift was probably the most valuable skill I developed during the entire process. But just as I was hitting my stride and feeling unstoppable, my family decided it was time to re-enter my life in a way I never saw coming. 3 years into running my clinic, when I was finally hitting consistent profitability and had built a reputation in the community, my phone rang with the call that would change everything. It was my mom, Margaret, using that sweet voice she only brought out when she wanted something important, asking if we could have a family meeting to discuss something exciting. After years of minimal contact and awkward holiday dinners where my clinic was barely mentioned, suddenly my parents wanted to sit down and talk about my business in detail. I should have known something was up when my dad David actually asked to see my financial reports, considering he had refused to even look at my business plan 5 years earlier. If you've ever had family members suddenly become interested in your success after years of doubt, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because you're going to want to hear how this conversation went down. Have you experienced that moment when people who didn't believe in your dream suddenly want to be part of it, once it's successful? Have family members ever made you feel guilty for achieving something they said was impossible? Share your story in the comments, because this dynamic is more common than you might think, and your experience could help someone else who's dealing with the same situation right now. The meeting took place at their house, around the same kitchen table where they had dismissed my business plan years earlier, and the irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in the same chair where I had once cried over their lack of support. My brother James was there too, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be the congratulations dinner I had briefly hoped for. My parents started with praise, telling me how proud they were, how impressed the neighbors were, how they had always known I was special, and for a moment, I felt that childhood need for their approval warming my chest. But then came the request that knocked the wind out of me completely. They wanted to become partners in my clinic, contributing what they called sweat equity, in exchange for ownership shares. My dad explained that they had been thinking about retirement and realized that being involved in my successful business could provide the financial security they needed for their golden years. My mom added that she had always been interested in healthcare administration and felt like she could really contribute to the growth of the practice. They presented it like they were doing me a favor, offering their experience and wisdom to help take my little clinic to the next level. The silence that followed their proposal felt like it lasted for hours, though it was probably only seconds while my brain processed what I had just heard. These were the same people who had called my dream unrealistic, who had suggested I get a safe job at an established practice, who had made me feel foolish for taking risks they would never take themselves. And now, after I had proven them wrong and built something successful despite their doubts, they wanted to walk in and claim ownership of what I had sacrificed everything to create. The audacity was breathtaking, but what hurt most was that they seemed genuinely surprised when I didn't immediately say yes, as if my success was somehow a family achievement rather than a personal one. But their shock was nothing compared to the emotional storm that was about to tear through our family when I gave them my answer. The emotional whiplash of that moment hit me like a physical blow, and I felt every emotion from rage to guilt to confusion swirling through my system at once. Here I was, finally receiving the recognition I had craved from my parents for years, but it came packaged with expectations that felt like a violation of everything I had worked to build. Part of me wanted to scream at them for having the audacity to ask for ownership of something they had actively discouraged me from creating, while another part of me felt guilty for not being grateful that they wanted to be involved in my success. The little girl inside me who had always sought their approval was at war with the business owner, who knew that this request was completely inappropriate. If you've ever felt torn between gratitude and resentment toward your family, please subscribe and hit that like button, because these complex emotions are something most successful people deal with, but rarely talk about openly. Have you ever had someone take credit for your success after they doubted you from the beginning? Have you struggled with feeling guilty for setting boundaries with family members who want to benefit from your hard work? Let me know in the comments, because these situations are incredibly difficult to navigate, and sometimes just knowing you're not alone can help you make clearer decisions. The doubt that crept in during the days following that meeting was unlike anything I had experienced during the construction phase, because this time, it wasn't about my ability to succeed. It was about whether I deserved to keep what I had built. My parents had a way of making me question my own memories, suggesting that they had been more supportive than I remembered, and that I was being ungrateful by not acknowledging their contributions to my success. "We raised you, we paid for your education, we gave you the foundation you needed," my mom said during a follow-up phone call, and suddenly I felt like maybe I was being selfish for wanting to keep full ownership of my clinic. But then I remembered all those nights when I had eaten ramen noodles so I could save money for equipment, all those weekends when I had worked construction instead of relaxing, all those moments when I had felt completely alone in pursuing this dream. My friend Michael helped me gain perspective when he said, "Ava, did your parents work 18-hour days to get your clinic off the ground? Did they risk their savings and their reputation? Did they spend 2 years eating cheap food and skipping vacations to make this happen?" The answer to all those questions was no. And that clarity helped me see that gratitude for their support didn't equal ownership of my achievements. The internal conflict reached its peak when I realized I was essentially grieving the relationship I had always wanted with my parents, one where they supported my dreams unconditionally and celebrated my success without trying to claim it as their own. I had to accept that the parents I wanted and the parents I actually had were two different things, and that acceptance was both heartbreaking and liberating. Dr. Lisa Park, my therapist, helped me understand that setting boundaries with family isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about protecting the thing you've worked so hard to create so you can continue growing and serving others. And that's when I knew what my answer had to be, even though I also knew it would change our family dynamic forever. The sleepless nights following my parents' request gave me time to think deeply about what ownership really means, and I came to understand that it's not just about money or legal documents. It's about the right to make decisions about something you've created with your own hands and sacrifice. Every choice I had made in building my clinic, from the color of the walls to the type of equipment I purchased, reflected my values, my vision, and my commitment to providing the kind of healthcare I believed in. Giving up ownership would mean giving up the autonomy to run my practice according to my principles, and that felt like betraying not just myself, but also the patients who trusted me to provide them with something different than corporate medicine. What struck me most during this reflection period was realizing that my parents' request revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what entrepreneurship actually involves. They seemed to think that business ownership was just about collecting profits, not about taking responsibility for every decision, every risk, and every consequence. They had watched me struggle for years, but they had never truly understood the weight of being the person everyone turns to when something goes wrong, or the pressure of knowing that other people's livelihoods depend on your ability to keep the business running. When my receptionist Jennifer needed surgery and couldn't work for 6 weeks, I was the one who covered her salary and her responsibilities, because that's what ownership means. You take care of your people no matter what. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my clinic wasn't just a business. It was an extension of who I had become through the process of building it. Every late night, I had spent learning about medical equipment. Every difficult conversation with contractors, every moment of doubt I had pushed through had shaped me into someone capable of running a successful practice. My parents wanted to skip all that growth and jump straight to the rewards, but the truth is that the person I was before building my clinic wouldn't have been capable of running it successfully. The struggles weren't just obstacles to overcome. They were the very experiences that qualified me to be a business owner. I also began to understand that my parents' request wasn't really about money or retirement planning. It was about their own regrets and fears about the choices they had made in their lives. My dad had worked for the same accounting firm for 30 years, following a safe path that provided security, but never the excitement of building something from nothing. My mom had always talked about wanting to start her own tutoring business, but had never taken the risk, choosing stability over adventure every time. Seeing me succeed where they had been too afraid to try probably triggered their own questions about what their lives could have been if they had been braver. But here's what I realized was the most important truth of all. Honoring my parents didn't require sacrificing my autonomy, and being grateful for their support didn't mean giving them control over my future. The best way I could show appreciation for everything they had given me was to use those gifts, my education, my values, my work ethic, to build something meaningful and sustainable that could serve our community for years to come. And that required me to maintain full control over the vision and direction of my practice, even if it meant disappointing the people who had raised me. The conversation I was about to have with them would be one of the hardest of my life, but I finally knew exactly what I needed to say. The hardest conversation of my life happened 3 days later when I called my parents and asked them to meet me at my clinic instead of their house, because I needed them to see what I was potentially giving up before I gave them my answer. Standing in my waiting room, surrounded by everything I had built with my own hands, I felt stronger and more centered than I had in years. I looked at my parents, David with his hopeful expression, and Margaret with her confident smile, and I realized that this moment would define not just my business future, but my relationship with myself for the rest of my life. "Mom, Dad," I said, "I love you both more than words can express, but I can't give you ownership of my clinic. If you've ever had to choose between keeping peace with your family and protecting something you've worked incredibly hard to build, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button because I want to share more stories about making these difficult but necessary decisions." Have you ever been in a position where saying no to family felt impossible, but saying yes would have betrayed everything you stood for? Tell me about it in the comments because these moments require tremendous courage, and I want to celebrate your strength in standing up for what you believe in, even when it's painful. The silence that followed my statement was deafening, and I watched my parents' faces go through a range of emotions: surprise, disappointment, confusion, and finally, anger. My dad was the first to speak, his voice tight with frustration. "Ava, after everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" My mom added, "We're not asking for charity. We're offering to help you grow this business beyond what you could do alone." But I had anticipated these responses and had prepared myself mentally for the guilt trip that I knew was coming, because I finally understood that their disappointment was about their expectations, not about my choices. I explained to them as calmly and lovingly as I could that gratitude for their past support didn't create an obligation to share future ownership, and that the skills they had taught me, independence, hard work, integrity, were exactly the qualities that made it important for me to maintain control of what I had built. "You raised me to be strong and self-sufficient," I told them, "and that's exactly what I'm being right now." I offered to pay them back for my education expenses over time, to consult with them on business decisions, and to find other ways to show my appreciation, but ownership of my clinic wasn't negotiable. The meeting ended with my parents walking out without saying goodbye, and my brother James texting me later to say he understood my decision, even though he was caught in the middle of the family drama. Driving home that night, I felt simultaneously heartbroken and empowered. Heartbroken because I had disappointed the people I loved most, but empowered because I had finally learned to prioritize my own judgment over other people's expectations. My mentor, Dr. Rodriguez, called me that evening and said something I'll never forget. "Ava, the people who truly love you will eventually understand that your boundaries aren't walls to keep them out. They're foundations that allow you to keep building. And I held on to those words during the difficult months that followed, knowing that I had made the right choice even though it came at a painful cost. 2 years have passed since that difficult conversation with my parents, and while our relationship is still healing, my clinic has grown into everything I dreamed it could be, and more. I now have 4 employees, including 2 nurses and a physician assistant, and we're serving over 300 patients who come to us, because they know we'll take the time to listen and provide personalized care. The autonomy I fought so hard to protect has allowed me to implement innovative treatment approaches, flexible scheduling, and community outreach programs that never would have been possible if I had partners who didn't share my vision. Every day I walk into my clinic, I'm reminded that the temporary pain of setting boundaries was worth the permanent joy of maintaining my independence. The most unexpected outcome of standing firm on my boundaries was that it actually improved my relationship with my parents in the long run, though it took time and patience from all of us to get there. About 6 months after our confrontation, my mom called me to apologize and admit that she had never really understood what it meant to build a business from scratch. My dad took longer to come around, but eventually he acknowledged that my decision showed the same determination and principles that he had always tried to instill in me. We still don't talk about business ownership, but we do talk about my successes and challenges as a practice owner, and their support feels more genuine now because it doesn't come with strings attached. What I learned through this experience is that self-sufficiency isn't about rejecting help or isolating yourself from others. It's about maintaining the right to make your own decisions and accept responsibility for your own outcomes. There's a profound difference between accepting support and giving up control, and understanding that distinction has made me a better business owner, a better daughter, and a better person overall. When patients tell me how grateful they are for the care we provide, I know that care is possible because I maintained the autonomy to run my practice according to my values, rather than someone else's expectations or financial interests. The boundaries I established weren't walls to keep people out. They were foundations that allowed me to keep building something meaningful and sustainable. My clinic now mentors other healthcare professionals who want to start their own practices, and I always tell them that the hardest part isn't the business plan or the financing. It's learning to trust your own judgment when everyone around you is offering opinions and advice. The people who truly support your dreams will respect your boundaries, and the people who don't respect your boundaries probably aren't supporting your dreams for the right reasons anyway. Looking back, I realized that my parents' request was actually a gift in disguise because it forced me to articulate and defend what I had built, which made me appreciate it even more deeply. I'm now planning to expand to a second location, and this time my parents are genuinely excited about my growth plans without expecting to be included as owners, which tells me that our family has finally found the right balance between love and respect. The clinic I built alone has become the foundation for relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation, and that's worth more than any partnership could ever be. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to show them who you really are, even when that means disappointing who they wanted you to be. 5 years after that life-changing conversation with my parents, I can honestly say that learning to set boundaries with the people I love most was the most valuable skill I ever developed, both as a business owner and as a human being. My clinic now serves over 500 patients, employs 8 people, and has become a model for other independent practices in our region. But the real victory isn't in the numbers or the success metrics. It's in the fact that I wake up every morning knowing that the life I'm living is authentically mine, built on my own terms, and sustained by my own efforts. The girl who once cried over her parents' disapproval has become a woman who can handle difficult conversations with confidence and compassion. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to choose between family expectations and personal dreams, I need you to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because there are so many more stories like this that need to be shared. Are you currently struggling with family members who want to benefit from your success after doubting your abilities? Are you building something that others don't understand but you know in your heart is right for you? Share your experience in the comments, because your story could be the encouragement someone else needs to keep going when things get tough. The most important lesson I learned through this entire experience is that love and boundaries aren't opposites. They're partners that work together to create healthier, more honest relationships. My relationship with my parents is now stronger than it's ever been, because we finally understand and respect each other's perspectives, even when we don't agree. They've learned to appreciate my independence without trying to control it, and I've learned to value their input without feeling obligated to follow it. My brother James often says that watching our family navigate this conflict taught him important lessons about pursuing his own dreams, and that makes all the difficult conversations worthwhile. What changed everything for me was realizing that I didn't need anyone's permission to live my life according to my own values and vision. The clinic I built represents more than just a successful business. It represents my commitment to serving others in a way that feels authentic to who I am, and that authenticity is only possible when you're not trying to meet other people's expectations of what your life should look like. The patients who trust me with their health care, the employees who depend on me for their livelihoods, and the community I serve all benefit from the fact that I maintained the courage to stay true to my vision, even when it cost me temporary peace with my family. The ripple effects of that decision continue to surprise me in the best possible ways. Last month, a young nurse named Emma approached me at a medical conference and told me that hearing my story had inspired her to start planning her own practice instead of settling for a job she didn't love. These conversations remind me why it was so important to protect what I built, not just for my own satisfaction, but because independent healthcare providers who are passionate about patient care can make a real difference in their communities. And that difference is only possible when you have the autonomy to practice medicine according to your principles rather than someone else's financial interests. After sharing this entire journey with you, I want you to think about what you would have done in my position. When success finally came after years of doubt and struggle, would you have shared ownership with family members who had discouraged your dreams? Or would you have protected what you worked so hard to build? There's no right answer that works for everyone, but there is a right answer that works for you. And finding that answer requires honest self-reflection about your values, your goals, and your willingness to live with the consequences of your choices. The question that keeps coming back to me is whether we have an obligation to include our families in our success, even when they didn't support us during our struggles. I've come to believe that we have an obligation to be grateful for the foundation they provided, but that gratitude doesn't require us to sacrifice our autonomy or compromise our vision. The best way to honor the people who raised us is to use the values they taught us to build something meaningful and lasting, even if that means building it on our own terms. What's your take on family expectations versus personal boundaries? Do you believe that achieving success creates an obligation to share it with family members who doubted you along the way? Or do you think that protecting your independence is sometimes the most loving thing you can do? These are complex questions without easy answers, but they're questions that everyone who achieves success will eventually have to grapple with. If you want to hear more stories about navigating family dynamics, building something from nothing, and learning to trust your own judgment even when everyone around you thinks you're crazy, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. In my next video, I'll be sharing the story of what happened when I decided to expand my practice and the surprising person who became my biggest supporter along the way. Until then, remember that your dreams are valid, your boundaries are necessary, and your success belongs to you, no matter who thinks they deserve a piece of it.